December 3rd, 1987. The Golden Nugget's main stage. Vincent Torino had sung 3 songs when the stagehand whispered the news in his ear. His father was dead, heart attack, 40 minutes ago. Vinny kept singing. He finished My Way, started Fly Me to the Moon. Then something changed. His voice cracked. Words came out that weren't in the song. Words about blood, about a warehouse, about killing Tommy Castellano with his bare hands. 300 people heard every word. The tape machines were rolling. Security started moving toward the stage. What happened in the next 4 minutes ended Vincent Torino's career forever, made him disappear for 15 years, and created the most dangerous recording in Vegas history. The night a confession destroyed the wrong man. The night the real killers finally got their perfect fall guy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The blood under Vincent's fingernails wasn't supposed to be there. He stared at his hands in the Golden Nugget's backstage mirror, the harsh fluorescent light making the dark crescents under each nail look like tiny crescent moons. The confession had poured out of him like vomit, unstoppable, horrifying, real. But he'd never killed Tommy Castellano. He'd never even met the man. Had he? The theater had erupted into chaos. Security guards shouting into radios. Audience members stumbling over each other toward the exits. The house band still playing, confused, waiting for someone to tell them what the hell just happened. Through the curtain, Vincent could hear Detective Morrison's voice cutting through the noise, already calling for backup. 4 minutes. That's all it had taken to destroy everything. Vincent's hands shook as he reached for his jacket. The sequined stage costume felt ridiculous now, like a costume from someone else's life. Someone who used to sing love songs and make people forget their troubles. Someone who existed 47 minutes ago, before his father died, before words that weren't his own had spilled from his mouth like poison. The dressing room door rattled. "LVPD, open up!" Vincent looked around the cramped space. The cards from fans, the photos with minor celebrities, the bottle of bourbon that had gotten him through 3 years of late-night sets, all of it meaningless now. In 30 seconds, they'd break down the door and arrest him for a murder he couldn't remember committing but had just confessed to in front of 300 witnesses. The window, fire escape. Vincent had used it before to sneak cigarette breaks between sets. He was halfway through when the door splintered open behind him. There, fire escape! The December night hit him like a fist. Las Vegas in winter, people never expected the cold. Vincent's dress shoes slipped on the metal grating as he climbed down, the sounds of pursuit echoing above. His mind raced, trying to piece together fragments that didn't fit. The warehouse he'd described in his confession, he could picture it perfectly now. The smell of motor oil and sawdust. Tommy Castellano's face surprised, then afraid. The weight of hands around a throat. But it wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Vincent dropped into the alley behind the casino, landing hard on his knees. The impact jarred something loose in his memory. A flash of sitting in a chair, someone's voice saying, "When you hear the word father, you'll remember everything. But remember what? And who had been speaking?" Sirens wailed from every direction now. LVPD worked fast when it involved connected guys like Tommy Castellano. Vincent stumbled toward the street, staying in the shadows between buildings. His father was dead, and somehow that had triggered, what? A breakdown? A confession to something he'd done but blocked out? Or something worse? Vincent's reflection caught in a shop window as he passed, wild-eyed, still in his ridiculous stage outfit, looking every inch the guilty man. But guilty of what? The more he tried to remember actually killing Castellano, the more the memory felt like watching someone else's movie. Everything was there except the feeling of having lived it. He ducked into a 24-hour diner 3 blocks from the casino. The waitress looked up from her magazine, took in his appearance, and wisely decided to mind her own business. Vincent slid into a corner booth and tried to think. The confession had been perfect, too perfect. He'd given details that only the killer would know, the warehouse location, the time of death, even what Castellano had been wearing. How did he know those things? And why did the memories feel like someone else's thoughts crammed into his skull? Through the window, Vincent watched police cars stream past toward the Golden Nugget. They'd find his car in the casino lot, his apartment address in the employee files. By morning, his face would be on every news channel in Nevada. The crooner who confessed to murder on stage. The story was too strange, too public to cover up, which meant someone wanted it public. Vincent ordered coffee with shaking hands and tried to figure out who would benefit from Vincent Torino taking the fall for Tommy Castellano's murder. The list of people who wanted Castellano dead was probably longer than the Yellow Pages, but the list of people who could plant fake memories in Vincent's head and trigger them with news of his father's death, that was a much shorter, much more dangerous list. His father's death. Vincent closed his eyes, grief hitting him fresh. In all the chaos, he'd barely had time to process it. Martin Torino, dead at 63 from a heart attack that came out of nowhere. Or maybe it hadn't come out of nowhere at all. Vincent's coffee arrived, and with it, a terrible certainty that his father's timing wasn't coincidence. Someone had orchestrated this entire night, from the death to the confession. Someone who knew exactly which buttons to push to make Vincent Torino disappear forever. The question was, who wanted him gone badly enough to commit the perfect frame job? Outside, snow began to fall on the city of second chances, and Vincent realized his were all used up. The coffee tasted like burnt regret and filtered water, but Vincent wrapped his hands around the mug anyway, savoring the heat that seeped through the cracked ceramic. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with the persistence of dying insects, casting everything in a sickly yellow pallor that made the red vinyl booth seats look like old blood. 15 years ago, this was the life he'd run from. Anonymous diners, cheap coffee, and the weight of other people's mistakes pressing down on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Now he was right back where he started, except this time the mistake was his own, or someone wanted him to think it was. Through the streaked window, snow continued to dust the neon-lit streets. Each flake caught the casino lights before dissolving on the asphalt, brief and beautiful and gone. Like his career, like his father, like everything Vincent had tried to build in the hollow space where his past used to live. Martin Torino. Even thinking his father's name felt like pressing on a fresh bruise. Vincent closed his eyes and tried to summon a better memory than the phone call that had shattered his world 2 hours ago. His father teaching him to tie his shoes in their cramped Brooklyn apartment, patient hands guiding small fingers. The smell of his aftershave, Old Spice and cigarettes, and the faint metallic tang that came from working construction. The way he'd sit in the front row of every high school talent show, grinning like Vincent was already headlining the Copa. "You got pipes, kid," Martin used to say, tapping his chest. "But pipes ain't enough. You need heart. You sing from here, people listen. You sing from your head, they walk away." Vincent had been singing from his head for 3 years now, going through the motions at the Golden Nugget while his heart stayed locked away somewhere safe. Safe and silent and useless. Maybe that's why tonight had felt different. For those terrible 4 minutes on stage, something had cracked open inside him, and what poured out wasn't music, it was poison. The bell above the diner door chimed, and Vincent's shoulders tensed. But it was just a trucker in a John Deere cap, stomping snow off his boots and nodding to the waitress like they were old friends. The kind of normal interaction Vincent might never have again. By tomorrow, his face would be everywhere, and anonymity would become another luxury he couldn't afford. He thought about the people who would see those news reports. His landlord, Mrs. Chen, who brought him soup when he had the flu, and never asked why he lived alone. The kid who worked the lighting booth at the Nugget, always eager to talk about Miles Davis and Coltrane, eyes bright with the kind of musical passion Vincent had forgotten how to feel. Betty, the cocktail waitress who covered his bar tab when times were tight and listened to his problems without judgment. They'd all think they'd been wrong about him, that beneath the smooth voice and easy smile, he'd been harboring something dark and violent. The thought made his chest tight with a grief that had nothing to do with his father's death and everything to do with the slow, inevitable loss of every good thing he'd accidentally stumbled into. Vincent pulled out his phone, then put it away again. Who could he call? His manager would drop him before the news cycle finished its first rotation. The few friends he'd made in Vegas were casino people. They'd scatter like roaches when the lights came on, protecting their own reputations. And the people from before, from his New York days, they belonged to a Vincent Torino who died the night he walked away from everything that mattered. The coffee was getting cold. forming a thin skin on the surface that caught the light like oil on water. Vincent stared into it and saw his own reflection fractured and dark, a funhouse mirror version of the man who'd stepped on stage tonight, believing the worst thing that could happen was forgetting the words to "Fly Me to the Moon." Outside, a police cruiser rolled slowly past the diner, searchlights sweeping the storefronts like a lazy eye. Vincent ducked his head, knowing it was probably too late to matter but unable to stop himself. The instinct to hide, to survive, was stronger than logic now. Stronger than the part of him that wanted to walk outside and surrender, to end this nightmare before it consumed what little remained of his life. But surrender meant accepting that the confession was real, that somewhere in the locked rooms of his memory, he'd strangled a man and buried the truth so deep that only his father's death could dig it up again. And if that was true, then Vincent Torino was a stranger to himself, and everything he'd believed about who he was had been a lie from the very beginning. The snow kept falling, and Vincent kept drinking bad coffee, waiting for the courage to decide which version of himself he was willing to die protecting. The trucker finished his pie and left, the door chime marking his departure like a funeral bell. Vincent was alone again with the waitress, who'd retreated behind the counter to flip through a tabloid magazine, and the persistent buzz of dying fluorescence. He was reaching for his wallet, preparing to face whatever came next, when the phone booth in the corner started ringing. Nobody used phone booths anymore. The thing looked like a relic from the Carter administration. Scratched plexiglass, a handset that probably hadn't been sanitized since the Clinton years, and a coin slot that accepted quarters like a slot machine with terrible odds. Vincent stared at it, the shrill ring cutting through the diner's ambient hum like a blade. The waitress looked up from her magazine. "Damn thing's been disconnected for 2 years," she said, more to herself than to Vincent. Phone company was supposed to haul it out, but it kept ringing. Vincent felt something cold settle in his stomach, the same sensation he'd had on stage right before his father's death announcement, the same feeling of standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the ground was about to give way. The waitress walked over and lifted the handset, probably to stop the noise. She listened for a moment, frowned, then looked directly at Vincent. "It's for you. That's impossible." "Vincent Torino?" she asked, holding the receiver out like it might bite her. The coffee cup slipped from Vincent's fingers, shattering against the table and sending lukewarm liquid cascading onto the floor. He stared at the waitress, at the phone, at the impossible equation of a disconnected booth receiving a call for a man whose real name nobody in this diner should know. "I think there's some mistake." "Vincent Torino," the waitress repeated, her voice taking on an edge. "Someone wants to talk to you." Vincent's legs felt like water as he stood. Each step toward the phone booth stretched like walking through molasses, time dilating the way it had during those final moments on stage. The handset felt heavier than it should, the plastic warm against his ear as if someone else had been holding it for hours. "Hello?" Silence. Then, barely audible through the static, music. A piano, soft and melancholy, playing something familiar, something Vincent had heard before but couldn't quite place. "Who is this?" The music continued, and underneath it, something else, a voice, distant and distorted, singing words Vincent recognized with a jolt of terror that nearly dropped him to his knees. It was his own voice, from tonight, but not the confession, something earlier in the set before everything went wrong. "The way you looked tonight, but the words were different. Wrong." Instead of Kern's lyrics, he heard himself singing about blood on his hands, about Tommy Castellano's final breath, about a warehouse where screams echoed off concrete walls. But Vincent remembered singing the real lyrics. He remembered the audience swaying, couples holding hands, the warm stage lights making everything golden and safe. He'd never sung those other words. They were impossible, a recording that couldn't exist. The song ended, and a woman's voice came through the static, crystal clear despite the ancient connection. "Hello, Vincent. I've been waiting a very long time to talk to you." "Who?" "My name is Elena Castellano. I think you knew my father." The handset slipped in Vincent's sweating palm. Tommy Castellano's daughter. The man he'd confessed to killing had a daughter, and somehow she'd tracked him to this anonymous diner, to a disconnected phone that shouldn't work, with a recording that shouldn't exist. "I don't understand." "You will." Her voice was calm, almost gentle, like a mother explaining something simple to a confused child. The song you just heard? That's from tonight's performance. But not the version anyone else heard. This is what you really sang, Vincent. What you were programmed to sing. That's impossible. I was there. I know what I sang. Do you? Are you sure? Elena's laugh was soft and terrible. Tell me, Vincent, do you remember everything from tonight? Every moment between walking on stage and walking off? Every single word that came out of your mouth? Vincent opened his mouth to say yes, but the word died in his throat. Because now that she mentioned it, there were gaps. Fuzzy spaces between songs where the stage lights seemed too bright, where the audience faces blurred together like watercolors in rain. Moments where he felt like he was watching himself perform from somewhere far away. I have 17 recordings, Vincent. 17 different performances over the past 3 years, where you sang my father's murder in perfect detail. Each time a little different, a little more complete. You've been confessing for years. You just never remembered doing it. The phone booth felt like a coffin. Vincent's reflection stared back from the scratched plexiglass, and for a moment he saw a stranger, someone hollow-eyed and haunted, someone capable of things the Vincent he knew could never do. What do you want? Justice, Elena said simply. For my father, for my family, for the life you took. I didn't. Tomorrow night, Fremont Street, under the canopy. Come alone, and I'll show you the rest of the recordings. I'll show you who you really are. The line went dead. Vincent stood frozen in the phone booth for what felt like hours, the dead receiver buzzing in his hand like an angry wasp. When he finally hung up, the click echoed through the empty diner with a finality that made his chest tight. The waitress had disappeared into the kitchen, leaving him alone with the fluorescent hum and the impossible weight of Elena Castellano's words. Recordings. He stumbled back to his booth, legs unsteady, and slumped into the cracked vinyl seat. The spilled coffee had already been cleaned up. When had that happened? Time kept slipping away from him like water through cupped hands, the same way it had during those missing moments on stage. Vincent pulled out his phone, fingers shaking as he scrolled through his contacts. He needed an anchor, something real and familiar to prove he wasn't losing his mind completely. His thumb hovered over Betty's number, the cocktail waitress who'd covered his bar tab, who knew him as well as anyone in this hollow version of his life. But what would he say? Hey, Betty, I think I've been hypnotized into confessing to murder for 3 years, and also a dead man's daughter just called a disconnected phone booth to invite me to my own execution. How was your night? Instead, he called Marcus Webb. Marcus had been the Golden Nugget's head of security for 15 years, back when Vincent first arrived in Vegas with nothing but a duffel bag and a voice that still remembered how to break hearts. If anyone would know about strange recordings or people asking questions about Vincent's performances, it would be Marcus. The phone rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. Yeah? Marcus, it's Vincent. I need... The line went dead. Vincent stared at his phone, then tried again. This time it went straight to voicemail. He hung up and called the casino's main number, asking for security. I'm sorry, sir, the operator said, her voice professionally distant. Mr. Webb is unavailable. Can someone else help you? This is Vincent Torino. I perform at the... I'm sorry, sir. I can't connect you. The dial tone felt like a slap. Vincent tried calling Jimmy, the lighting tech who loved jazz and always stayed late to talk music. Straight to voicemail. Then Carol from the box office, who'd flirted with him for 2 years and always comped his friends. No answer. One by one, he worked through his contacts, the people who comprised his entire social circle in Vegas. The few who answered claimed bad connections and hung up quickly. Most didn't answer at all. It was as if Vincent Torino had become radioactive in the span of 3 hours, a name that burned whoever spoke it. When he tried calling the Golden Nugget directly and asking for the employee hotline, the operator told him there was no record of anyone by that name working at the casino. Vincent set his phone on the table and stared at it like it might grow fangs. He'd been erased, not just fired or blacklisted, but completely scrubbed from the official record. That level of thoroughness took serious juice, the kind that came from people who made problems disappear for a living. The diner's bell chimed again, and Vincent looked up to see a man in an expensive overcoat shaking snow from his shoulders. He was thin, well-dressed, with the kind of face that disappeared in crowds despite being perfectly ordinary. He scanned the diner once, his gaze passing over Vincent without recognition, then approached the counter and ordered coffee. Vincent started to relax until he noticed the man's shoes. Italian leather, polished to mirror brightness, the kind that cost more than most people made in a month. Nobody wore shoes like that to an all-night diner unless they were working. The man accepted his coffee and chose a booth with a clear view of both the front door and Vincent's table. He opened a newspaper, actual newsprint, not his phone, and began reading with the focused attention of someone who wasn't really reading at all. Vincent's mouth went dry. Elena had said come alone to Fremont Street, but she hadn't promised he'd make it that far unmolested. Maybe the phone call had been a distraction, a way to keep him stationary while someone moved into position. He stood slowly, dropping a 10 on the table for coffee he'd barely touched. The man behind the newspaper didn't look up, but Vincent caught the subtle shift in posture, the way predators tensed before striking. Vincent walked toward the restroom, moving casually despite the adrenaline screaming through his veins. The narrow hallway led past the kitchen to a back exit. He'd clocked it earlier, the same survival instinct that had served him during his first few months in Vegas when he'd still been watching over his shoulder for ghosts from New York. The alley behind the diner was dark and empty, snow falling heavier now, muffling sound and obscuring vision. Vincent pulled his jacket tight and started walking, not toward his apartment or his car, both compromised now, but deeper into the maze of side streets that would eventually lead him to downtown Las Vegas, to Fremont Street, where Elena Castellano waited with answers that might destroy him completely. Behind him, the diner's back door opened with a soft click.